He didn't even see it coming. By the time help arrived, she had already stabbed him 17 times. 17. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Just 1 week into living together in a quiet Georgia neighborhood, 24-year-old Kendrick Miles was found slumped against the kitchen counter. His white shirt soaked in blood, deep wounds covering his chest, neck, and back. His girlfriend, Tierra Jacobs, stood nearby holding the knife, shaking, not crying, not speaking. When the police asked her why she did it, she said only one word. He knew. But what did Kendrick know? And why would the woman who once called him her savior turn into the very thing that ended him? Subscribe if you love true crime stories that dig deep. Leave a comment and tell us, what would make someone do this just 7 days after moving in with the person they said they loved? Let's go back to the beginning. Kendrick Miles was the kind of guy every mother prayed her daughter would meet. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, Kendrick grew up in a strict church-going household. His mom, Patricia, worked as a nurse, and his dad was a retired Army sergeant who ran a small mechanic shop out of their garage. By high school, Kendrick was the kind of kid who walked girls to their cars late at night and helped his grandma mow her lawn every Sunday. He wasn't flashy. He didn't hang out in the streets, but he had a quiet confidence. The kind of calm that made you feel safe when he was around. In 2022, Kendrick got a job at a local FedEx hub while taking night classes in cybersecurity. That's where he met Tierra Jacobs. Tierra was the opposite of Kendrick in every way. While he was quiet and grounded, Tierra was loud, fiery, and full of energy. She wore long, bright-colored nails, always had something funny to say, and could flirt her way out of any situation. She had just moved to Atlanta from Charlotte, North Carolina, trying to escape a rocky past that she never really talked about. Tierra told Kendrick she worked at FedEx to lay low. She joked about it at first, said she had too many exes in Charlotte, but Kendrick could tell there was something she wasn't saying. Still, he was drawn to her. At first, their relationship was a whirlwind. Late-night drives, weekend road trips, deep talks about their future, laughing at stupid movies on Kendrick's couch. For the first time in a long time, Kendrick felt seen. But from the start, there were red flags. Tierra didn't like Kendrick talking to other women, even women he'd known for years. She once smashed his phone when she saw a text from a female coworker. She didn't let him go out with his friends unless she came along. When Kendrick's sister invited him to a family cookout, Tierra accused him of choosing his sister over his woman. Kendrick brushed it off. She's just passionate, he told his mom. She's protective. But deep down, Kendrick knew something wasn't right. Things got worse after Tierra lost her job at FedEx. She said her manager was trying to mess with her, but Kendrick later found out she'd cursed at a customer and threatened to throw a box at him. Kendrick offered to help her find something else. She said she didn't need his help. Within 2 months, she was borrowing money, using Kendrick's car more than he was, and staying over almost every night. She told Kendrick she didn't have anywhere else to go. And that's when she said the words Kendrick would later wish he hadn't agreed to. Let's move in together. At first, it felt like the next logical step. Kendrick had just signed a lease on a new one-bedroom apartment in Riverdale, about 15 minutes outside of Atlanta. Tierra brought her clothes, a few makeup bags, and a dusty box of old photos she refused to open. They played house for the first few days, ordering takeout, dancing in the living room, arguing over what Netflix show to watch. But then, it shifted. Tierra became obsessed with Kendrick's phone again. She'd wake him up in the middle of the night to ask who Tamika was, even though Tamika was his cousin. She accused him of cheating every time he stepped outside. One night, Kendrick came home from class to find Tierra sitting in the dark, staring at his unlocked laptop. "I know what you've been doing," she whispered. "What are you talking about?" Kendrick asked. Tierra stood up slowly. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't see you? I see everything." Kendrick started to get nervous. She was talking in riddles now, saying things that didn't make sense. He asked her to leave. She refused. He tried to call his mom. Tierra slapped the phone out of his hand. The next morning, she apologized, cooked him breakfast, cried in his arms and said she just had a bad night. Kendrick didn't know what to believe anymore. He told his best friend Marcus that he was thinking about ending things. Marcus told him, "You should have done that before she moved in, bruh." But Kendrick didn't listen. Instead, he tried to fix it. He planned a date night, booked a reservation at her favorite seafood spot, bought her a new pair of earrings she'd been eyeing, thought maybe if he showed her love, she'd calm down. That night, things seemed normal again. They laughed. They talked about their future. Kendrick felt a flicker of hope. But he didn't notice the way Tierra kept checking her purse. He didn't see the kitchen knife she had slid into the side of her bag before they left. He didn't know this would be the last night he ever laughed again. When they got home, Kendrick changed into his hoodie and joggers. Tierra went into the bathroom. 5 minutes later, she came out, silent. Kendrick asked her if she was okay. She didn't answer. He turned to face her, and that's when she lunged. The first stab hit his shoulder. He screamed, "What are you doing?" But she didn't stop. The second stab his side. The third his chest. He tried to run. She dragged him down. He begged her to stop. She whispered in his ear, "You shouldn't have looked in the box." Kendrick collapsed onto the floor, his body trembling, blood pouring from his wounds. By the time neighbors heard the screams and called 911, Tierra had already stabbed him 17 times. And then, she calmly sat beside him, cradling his head. "You should have just loved me, right?" she said. But what was in the box? What had Kendrick found? What truth had driven Tierra Jacobs to murder the only man who ever gave her stability? Before we continue, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video if you want to hear the rest of Kendrick and Tierra's tragic story. And drop a comment below. What do you think Kendrick saw that sealed his fate? By the time the paramedics arrived, Tierra was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, humming a soft tune, her hands, face, and clothes covered in Kendrick's blood. The knife was still lying beside her, the handle slick and shiny like it had just been washed. She looked up at the officers and smiled faintly, as if she'd been expecting them all along. "He looked inside the box," she repeated, her voice soft, eyes wide. The lead officer, Officer Dennison, radioed for backup as EMTs rushed to Kendrick's side. He was barely breathing. His shirt clung to him like wet paper, each gasp a struggle. The EMTs shouted medical codes and loaded him onto a stretcher while Tierra watched silently, never blinking. "He shouldn't have opened it," she said again, almost to herself. But what exactly was in that box? Why did it drive her to commit such a violent act? To answer that, we need to go back to the very first moment Tierra Jacobs met Kendrick. Before the laughter, before the late nights, before the love turned lethal. Tierra Jacobs was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Her childhood was unstable from the start. Her mother, Teresa, battled drug addiction, bouncing in and out of rehab, while her father was mostly absent, doing time for fraud and domestic violence. By age 11, Tierra was already raising her younger sister, Melanie. She cooked, cleaned, and skipped school to walk her to the bus stop. She learned early that the world didn't give second chances. If you wanted something, you had to take it. Tierra was different from the other kids. She didn't smile much. She didn't trust easily. She had a sharp mouth, a quicker temper, and a way of reading people that was almost unsettling. Her teachers called her gifted but difficult. Her classmates just called her mean. At age 16, she got into her first serious relationship with a boy named Daryl. He was older, 21, and had a car, a job, and charm. Tierra thought she had finally found someone who understood her pain. But within 3 months, Daryl started hitting her. First it was just slaps, then fists, then locking her in his room for hours when she didn't answer his calls fast enough. By 17, Tierra had dropped out of school and was living with him full-time. She stopped seeing friends. She stopped smiling altogether. One night, after a particularly bad beating, Tierra grabbed a steak knife from the kitchen drawer and threatened to stab him if he ever touched her again. He laughed at her, said she wouldn't do it. He was wrong. Daryl survived, but barely. He refused to press charges, maybe out of fear, maybe out of shame. But that was the first time Tierra had ever used a knife on someone. It wouldn't be the last. She fled Winston-Salem soon after and ended up in Charlotte under a fake name. That's where she started using boxes. Each time she moved, she kept one particular box with her. A plain, worn cardboard box, always sealed with duct tape, always hidden in the back of a closet or under a bed. No one was allowed to touch it. She told people it was filled with old journals or family memories too painful to relive. But that was a lie. The truth was darker. When she met Kendrick at FedEx, Tierra was already on the run emotionally. She had a string of failed relationships, a history of violence, and a mind that never stopped racing. But Kendrick was different. He was soft, gentle, steady. The kind of man she never thought she deserved. She saw him as her chance to rewrite her story. So when he offered her a ride home that first week on the job, she said yes. When he asked her to dinner 2 weeks later, she said yes. When he asked her to stay the night, she stayed. She told herself this time would be different. But even as they fell in love, Tierra was haunted by the past. She'd wake up at night sweating, thinking she heard Daryl's voice. She'd panic if Kendrick left the room too long. And the box never left her sight. She moved it to his apartment the night she moved in. put it under his bed, warned him never to touch it. Kendrick, ever trusting, said, "I'd never go through your stuff, babe." But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It was the 5th day of them living together when it happened. Kendrick had the day off. Tierra had gone out for a nail appointment and told him she'd be back in 2 hours. While cleaning the bedroom, Kendrick noticed the box under the bed. Duct tape all around it, dusty and old. But something was off. There was a smell coming from it. Not foul but strange. Like something old and forgotten. He told himself not to touch it. But after 15 minutes, he found himself kneeling beside it. He peeled back a corner of the tape. Inside there were photos. Dozens of them. Torn, scribbled on, some with faces scratched out. Most were of Tierra, but not the Tierra he knew. In these she looked angry, unwell, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Then he found a man's wallet. Inside it, a North Carolina ID with the name Daryl R. Clemens. A photo of him and Tierra smiling together. A hospital wristband. Then, at the bottom, a sealed envelope with the words, "If he opens this, it's over." Kendrick didn't open the envelope. But he didn't have to. That night, Tierra knew the box had been disturbed. She said nothing. Just watched him closely, eyes burning into his skin like fire. And that's what led to the attack. But here's where the twist deepens. Because later, during the investigation, police finally opened the envelope. Inside was a confession letter. Tierra had written everything. What happened with Daryl, what happened with a second man in Charlotte, and a third in South Carolina. Each one had hurt her. Each one had tried to control her. And each time she'd hurt them back. One of them didn't survive. The last line of the letter read, "If someone I love ever betrays me again, I won't run. I'll finish it." And she did. Tierra wasn't just running from her past. She was warning the future. And Kendrick never saw the signs for what they were. When Kendrick Miles was rushed into Grady Memorial Hospital, he had lost nearly 60% of his blood. The trauma team performed an emergency thoracotomy, cutting into his chest to clamp a severed artery just to keep him alive. The surgeons whispered among themselves, "How is he even still breathing?" But somehow, he was. And while Kendrick fought for his life on an operating table in downtown Atlanta, Tierra Jacobs sat quietly in the back of a police cruiser, staring out the window like she was on a Sunday drive. Her hands were cuffed. Her lips were sealed. But her eyes? Dead still. She said he opened the box. One officer murmured to another. "Yeah," the other one replied. But what the hell was in it? That box had become more than a piece of evidence. It was now the key to understanding a woman whose entire life was layered with pain, secrets, and rage. The moment Tierra was booked into Fulton County Jail, she asked for a pen and paper. No lawyer. No phone call. Just paper. And what she wrote shook investigators to the core. But let's pause here, because what's shocking isn't just what she did. It's why she did it. To understand the why, we need to dive deeper into her mind, the world she built, and the wounds she carried. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts so far. Do you believe some people are born dangerous, or are they made that way? Let's rewind again. 3 years before she met Kendrick, Tierra lived with a man named Jamal. They had met through mutual friends in Charlotte, and for once, Tierra thought she had found peace. Jamal was soft-spoken, spiritual, and even wanted to adopt Tierra's little sister, Melanie, who by now was bouncing between foster homes. But Jamal had one flaw: he kept secrets. Tierra grew suspicious. She began checking his phone when he slept, reading his journals, following him from work. And eventually she found something. Jamal had a second phone. One filled with messages to another woman. He wasn't just cheating, he was planning to leave. Tierra confronted him with tears in her eyes. At first, Jamal denied it. Then he laughed. "You're crazy," he said. "That's why nobody stays." That was the last time anyone saw Jamal alive. A fire broke out in his apartment 2 days later. Officially, it was ruled an accident, an electrical fault. But rumors swirled. Friends said Tierra had shown up unannounced that night, angry, drunk, screaming on the lawn. Nothing was ever proven. But after that, Tierra moved again. This time to Atlanta. And the box? It came with her. By now, it was more than just a container of her past. It was her archive, her evidence, her protection. Inside it were the trophies of her pain. Letters from abusive exes, photographs of bruises, restraining orders, diaries, even a necklace she claimed had been ripped from her neck during a fight. And at the very bottom, a blood-stained scarf. She never explained where it came from. She told herself, if they ever hurt me again, I'll have proof. But it became more than that. It became a test, a trap. If a man could love her and never look in that box, maybe he was worth keeping. But if he opened it, That meant he didn't trust her. And that's what Kendrick did. While Tierra sat in jail writing her truth, Kendrick remained unconscious in ICU. Tubes down his throat. Machines beeping around the clock. His mother, Patricia, never left the hospital room. She cried, holding his hand, whispering prayers. When detectives came to speak with her, she gave them the spare key to Kendrick's apartment and told them, "Check under the bed. You'll find what you're looking for." Detective Holloway, a 14-year veteran of the Atlanta PD, opened the box slowly. He didn't touch anything. He just stared. Inside were photos, police reports, a burnt journal, a rusted key labeled Unit 308 Winston Apartments. But it was the note that caught his attention. A handwritten letter folded inside a plastic sandwich bag. It said, "If someone finds this after I'm gone, know that I didn't mean to love the wrong ones. I just didn't know how to be loved right." Holloway knew what he was looking at. This wasn't just a murder case. This was a woman on the edge, a survivor turned weapon. 2 days after the attack, Kendrick woke up. Barely able to speak, his first words were, "Where is she?" The nurses told him Tierra had been arrested. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just closed his eyes and whispered, "I should have never touched that box." But Kendrick was about to learn something that would change how he saw everything. Because while Tierra had her demons, Kendrick had his own secrets too. Secrets that would come to light during the trial. And one of them involved a hidden phone Kendrick kept in his sock drawer. Police found it while collecting evidence. And what they discovered on that phone, it flipped the case completely. Because maybe, Tierra wasn't the only one hiding something. Kendrick's body was healing, but the truth? That was about to cut even deeper than any of Tierra's 17 stab wounds. When detectives found Kendrick's second phone in the sock drawer of his bedroom dresser, they weren't expecting much. Maybe some private messages, photos, or work emails. But what they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the perfect boyfriend. The phone was password protected, but Kendrick had used the same 4-digit code for everything, his birthday. 0911. Once inside, the phone revealed a string of text messages to a contact saved only as Nia. The most recent message was just days before the attack. "She's getting worse. I think she's gonna snap soon. But I need what's in that box first." Detective Holloway leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. He was investigating her. And not just that, Kendrick had been documenting Tierra's behavior for over 2 months. The phone was full of voice memos, notes, and photos of bruises, his own. Small, purple marks on his arms, scratches on his chest. There were even recordings of Tierra yelling in the middle of the night. One clip captured her saying, "I know what you're doing. You think I'm stupid, Kendrick? I'm not like them. I finish things." But the most damning part? In one note, Kendrick wrote, "She keeps that box under my bed. Said it has things she can't let go of. I'm going to find out what's really inside before it's too late." So maybe this wasn't just a case of a woman snapping from past trauma. Maybe this was a dangerous chess game and Kendrick had made his final move, without realizing the cost. Let's rewind to 3 weeks before the attack. Kendrick had confided in someone outside the relationship, Tanisha Nia Robinson, a childhood friend who had recently moved back to Atlanta. She worked as a legal assistant at a local law firm and had seen her fair share of domestic abuse cases. She told Kendrick, "You need to leave her. Now." But Kendrick wasn't ready. He said he loved Tierra, that he could help her. But most of all he said, "She's hiding something, Nia. I need to know what it is before I let go." So Nia gave him a plan. If Tierra ever left the apartment unattended, he was to photograph the contents of the box and bring it to her. She promised to have her boss review it for signs of criminal history or leverage to file a protective order. It was dangerous, but Kendrick agreed. And 5 days before he was stabbed, he opened the box. He saw the photos, the bloody scarf, the letters from Daryl. He even snapped a picture of the sealed envelope labeled, "If he opens this, it's over." He sent all of it to Nia with one text, "I think I just signed my death certificate." Nia never saw him again. Back at the hospital, Kendrick finally gained the strength to sit up. His mom, Patricia, had just stepped out to grab coffee when detectives entered the room. They asked him if he knew Tierra's history. He nodded. They asked him why he stayed. Kendrick looked at the ceiling for a long moment. "Because I saw myself in her." Turns out, Kendrick hadn't grown up with the perfect life everyone thought. Yes, his parents were strict. Yes, his home looked stable. But behind closed doors, Kendrick's father was a controlling man. A man who used fear to raise his family. Kendrick had once watched his father throw his mother's clothes out of a window during an argument. He'd learned to be calm, not because he was peaceful but because he was trained not to trigger rage. So when Tierra began showing the same volatility, he didn't run. He tried to manage it, control it, fix it, just like his mother did. Meanwhile, the DA's office had begun building a case against Tierra Jacobs. But it wasn't easy. Her public defender argued she suffered from complex PTSD, a disorder often linked to childhood abuse and long-term trauma. He claimed Kendrick had emotionally manipulated her, and that discovering he had invaded her private box, her trauma archive, triggered a psychotic break. But prosecutors had the phone, the recordings, the text to Nia. This wasn't just about trauma, it was premeditated. She brought the knife. She waited until he let his guard down. She made sure no one else would be home. And she struck. The media ran with the story. Girlfriend stabs boyfriend 17 times after he opens her box of secrets. Was it love or was it war? Tierra Jacobs, broken woman or cold-blooded killer? But inside her jail cell, Tierra wasn't reading the news. She was drawing, sketching pictures of Kendrick, writing poems. And on the back of one drawing she wrote, "You knew I was fire, and you still brought matches." The trial date was set. Nia agreed to testify. Kendrick planned to take the stand too, still recovering but alive. But then, just 2 weeks before the trial, Tierra made a phone call. Not to her lawyer, not to her mother, to Kendrick. She left a voicemail. Soft voice, no background noise, just silence, and her words. "I never wanted to hurt you, but I warned you. You opened the box. You read my story without permission. And now, the ending is yours." The call was traced and submitted as evidence. And Kendrick? He saved it to his voicemail inbox and played it every night before bed. Was it closure? Or something darker? Because deep down, part of Kendrick still loved her. But love can't undo what a blade has already written in flesh. And as the trial approached, so did the biggest twist of all. Because while Tierra sat in jail preparing her defense, someone else was watching. Someone connected to that rusty key found in the box. Someone who held answers even Tierra didn't know were missing. And their appearance in the courtroom would change everything. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the hallways. Kendrick, dressed in a gray suit with a visible scar above his collarbone, walked in slowly with the help of a cane. His mother sat directly behind him, tissues already in her hand. But all eyes turned when Tierra Jacobs was let in, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wearing an orange jumpsuit that couldn't hide the fire in her eyes. She didn't look at Kendrick. Not once. She walked in like she didn't regret a thing. But that would change. Because that morning, the prosecution had received a call from someone they didn't expect. A woman named Dolores Clemens. Daryl Clemens' mother. Yes, that Daryl. The same man Tierra had stabbed at age 17. The man she claimed she'd left behind in Winston-Salem. The man everyone assumed had walked away and disappeared. Dolores was calling with a different story. Daryl wasn't dead. He was very much alive. And he had something to say. Let's pause and rewind the timeline for a moment. Earlier on, we learned Tierra stabbed Daryl during a violent fight in their apartment. But what we didn't know was that Daryl didn't disappear because he wanted to. He vanished because Tierra made him. According to Dolores, after the stabbing, Daryl suffered a mental breakdown. He spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility after Tierra filed a restraining order claiming he had attacked her. His criminal record stuck and his version of the story was ignored. Ashamed and traumatized, Daryl left North Carolina and moved to Columbia, South Carolina, where he changed his name, started a new life, and never spoke Tierra's name again. But he watched the trial unfold on the news. And when he saw Tierra's face on screen, he called his mother and said, "She did it again." Back in the Atlanta courtroom, the prosecution filed an emergency motion to add Daryl as a surprise witness. Tierra's public defender objected, but the judge allowed it. And when Daryl walked into the courtroom that day, even Tierra gasped. She stood up, eyes wide, jaw trembling. "Objection, Your Honor," her lawyer shouted. But it was too late. Daryl took the stand. And what he said stunned everyone. "She told me once," Daryl began, voice shaking, "that she didn't want love unless it came with pain. That if a man didn't suffer for her, he didn't deserve her. After I woke up in that hospital bed with a punctured lung and blood in my mouth, I still wanted to forgive her. But she told me, 'You should have just kept your mouth shut.'" The courtroom was silent. Tierra sat frozen. Kendrick stared straight ahead. And the judge? He leaned forward slowly. "Did she ever say why she hurt you?" the prosecutor asked. "Because I found out she wasn't who she said she was," Daryl replied. Asterisk, her name wasn't Tierra back then. Was Tiana Jennings. Asterisk, gasps echoed across the room. Tierra had been living under an alias. Kendrick's jaw dropped. Even Patricia, his mother, covered her mouth. The woman who stabbed Kendrick 17 times had not just been hiding trauma. She had been hiding her entire identity. Investigators scrambled to confirm the name. Within hours, they found documents showing that Tiana Jennings had legally changed her name to Tierra Jacobs in 2020 using forged papers. Her original file listed her as a person of interest in 2 unsolved violent assaults in North Carolina and 1 suspected arson in Charlotte. The same fire that killed a man named Jamal. Yes, that Jamal. The same man Tierra dated before moving to Atlanta. It was no longer just about Kendrick. It was a pattern. A string. A trail of fire and blood. At this point, the prosecution shifted their entire strategy. This wasn't just second-degree assault anymore. They filed for attempted murder. And in closing arguments, the prosecutor turned to the jury and said, "This isn't about a woman breaking down. This is about a woman who became a storm. A storm that moves from city to city, leaving every man who loves her destroyed." Tierra remained quiet throughout. No tears. No outbursts. Just a soft whisper to herself as the jury walked out. They all did it to themselves. But it wasn't over. Because after Daryl's testimony and the name change reveal, Kendrick requested a private meeting with Tierra. Yes, he asked to see her. Against everyone's advice. And what happened in that room? Only 2 people truly know. But according to the guard stationed outside the door, Kendrick and Tierra sat in silence for 5 full minutes. Then Tierra leaned forward and whispered something to him. And Kendrick started crying. Not angry tears. Not rage. Just heartbreak. When he walked out of that room, he told his mother. She didn't just break. She shattered years ago. And as the jury returned to deliver their verdict, Kendrick closed his eyes and said, "Whatever happens, I just hope it ends here." But what if it didn't? Because remember that rusty key found in the box? The one labeled Unit 308 Winston Apartments? Well, investigators finally traced it back. And what they found inside that apartment wasn't empty. There were photos, more letters, and one shocking discovery. A baby's hospital bracelet. Labeled, Melanie J. Jacobs, female, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Tierra's younger sister. The one she raised. The one who disappeared from foster care records in 2019. But no one had seen Melanie since. And now the question hung in the air like smoke. Where is she? And what role does she play in the story Tierra has never told? The courtroom drama had already shaken Atlanta. Tierra Jacobs, formerly Tiana Jennings, was facing attempted murder charges, identity fraud, and now, a flood of questions surrounding the mysterious disappearance of her younger sister, Melanie. That hospital bracelet found in Unit 308 changed everything. Detective Holloway led a team back to the apartment complex in Winston-Salem where the key had been traced. The unit was long abandoned, lights off, utilities cut. But the dusty air inside whispered secrets that had been trapped for years. On the living room wall, photos were tacked up in no particular order. Some were of Tierra and Melanie as children. Others showed Melanie older, maybe 15 or 16, standing alone in what looked like a shelter or group home. And then, nothing. No adult photos. No social media trace. No official school records. It was as if Melanie had disappeared off the face of the earth. Except for one clue. Tucked inside a shoebox under the bed was a short letter, in loopy handwriting. Tierra said if I ever left, no one would find me. But I need to leave. I have to. She's not my sister anymore. Melanie J. Beneath the letter was a bus ticket stub from Charlotte to Birmingham, dated July 2, 2019. That was the last trace anyone had of Melanie Jacobs. Until now. Back in Atlanta, Kendrick sat with Detective Holloway and asked a question that had been haunting him since the box was first opened. Was I just her next target? Or was I supposed to save her? Holloway didn't answer. Instead, he opened his file and slid a photo across the table. It showed a teenage girl with Tierra's eyes, but softer, more afraid. This is Melanie. And we think she's still alive. We just don't know where. And just like that, Kendrick had a new mission. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the last person Tierra had let close, and the only person who might know where Melanie had gone. Back in her cell, Tierra had gone silent. She refused to answer more questions. She stopped speaking to her lawyer. Stopped eating. Just sat in her cell, sketching pictures of people. Some familiar, some strange. Always in pairs. Always one smiling, one crying. Until one day the prison chaplain visited her. She asked him only one question. "Can you burn a box for me?" When he asked what was inside, she said, "Everything that makes me dangerous." The chaplain alerted authorities, who retrieved the final box from her old storage unit outside of Charlotte. Inside were children's drawings, a singed teddy bear, and dozens of letters, addressed to Melanie. "I'm sorry I couldn't keep you safe. They wanted to take you from me. I had to protect you. Don't be like me. Be better." For the first time the narrative began to shift. Because maybe Tierra hadn't harmed Melanie. Maybe she'd hidden her, to protect her. But from who? That's when the twist came. Because a DNA match finally linked Melanie to a woman living under a false name in Mobile, Alabama. She had changed her identity, was working at a bookstore, going by the name Janelle Green. And when authorities contacted her, she refused to speak to them. Until she heard one name. Kendrick Miles. They arranged a meeting. In a small private room at the courthouse, Kendrick waited nervously. The door opened slowly. A young woman stepped inside, late 20s, hair in braids, soft eyes, a nervous twitch in her hands. It was Melanie. Janelle. She sat across from Kendrick, silent for a long moment, then finally said, "You're the one she loved." Kendrick nodded. "I thought I could save her," he said. Melanie shook her head. She never wanted saving. She wanted to bury the past. And she buried me with it. Kendrick leaned forward. "Why did she hide you?" Melanie's voice cracked. "Because I knew the truth about Jamal." The name hung in the air. Melanie continued. "Tierra didn't kill Jamal because he cheated. She killed him because he found out what happened, when we were kids. What our stepfather did to us. He threatened to report it. She told him it wasn't his story to tell. So she set the fire." Kendrick blinked slowly. He hadn't expected that. "She didn't want Jamal exposing the trauma she tried so hard to forget," Melanie whispered. "So she erased him. And tried to erase me too." Suddenly Tierra's rage made more sense. She wasn't just angry at betrayal. She was trying to silence the past, again and again. Anyone who got too close. Anyone who opened the box. Anyone who saw her. Was punished. That night, Kendrick returned home, the weight of 1,000 truths pressing down on him. He looked at his phone, replayed her voicemail one last time. "You should have just loved me, right?" But now he knew the truth. She didn't know what love was. She only knew survival. And survival, for Tierra, had become violence in disguise. The trial resumed. Melanie took the stand. Told everything. The abuse. The fire. The fear. And the night she ran. Tierra never looked up. Not once. Not even when Melanie, voice shaking, said, "You hurt everyone who tried to help you. Including me." And in that moment something inside Kendrick cracked. Because despite everything Tierra had done, he still remembered the girl on his couch, laughing at dumb movies. The woman who danced barefoot in his kitchen. The voice that told him, "I finally feel safe with you." But safety built on silence never lasts. And secrets never stay buried. Especially not the ones written in blood. The jury was restless. They'd heard testimony after testimony, Kendrick's, Daryl's, Melanie's. They'd seen the box. They'd read the letter Tierra had labeled, "If he opens this, it's over." And now all that was left was the verdict. But just before closing arguments, Tierra Jacobs did something no one expected. She asked to testify. Her lawyer tried to stop her. The DA smirked. The courtroom buzzed like a hive full of secrets. And then Tierra took the stand. She wore no makeup, no expression, just handcuffs, an orange jumpsuit, and years of pain behind her eyes. She looked straight at the jury and said, "I am not crazy. I am not innocent. But I didn't stab Kendrick because I hated him. I stabbed him because he became like all the others. He crossed a line he knew not to cross." The DA interrupted. "Miss Jacobs, do you believe opening a box justifies 17 stab wounds?" Tierra didn't blink. "That box was my graveyard. My proof. My soul. And when he touched it, he took pieces of me I hadn't given him. So yes, I snapped. But not because I'm evil. Because I've been dying in silence for 20 years. And I finally broke." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Kendrick looked down, conflicted. But then Tierra said something that changed everything. "Melanie lied to you." The room gasped. "I didn't try to erase her. I sent her away. To protect her. She saw me set the fire. She knew what I did to Jamal. I begged her not to tell. She said she wouldn't, but I didn't believe her. So I paid a woman in Charlotte $500 to drive her to Alabama, give her a new name and leave her there. I thought it was mercy, but maybe it was just fear. The prosecutor asked, "Fear of being caught?" Tierra shook her head. "Fear of being unloved." Again. Earlier on, Melanie had painted herself as the sister left behind. But now the lines blurred. Because Tierra's testimony revealed something darker. Both sisters were victims. Both were survivors. But only one had chosen to erase the past by confronting it. The other tried to erase it by controlling everyone around her. And when that didn't work, she let the trauma burn everything down. After Tierra's testimony, court recessed for the day. Outside, Kendrick sat on a bench alone, head in hands. A reporter asked him, "Do you think Tierra deserves to be punished or helped?" He looked up and said, "Maybe both. She tried to kill me. That's real. But what made her that way? That's real too." We always tell victims to speak up. But what if the victim is also the threat? It was a question no one had the answer to. The jury deliberated for 12 hours. 12 hours of unpacking a life wrapped in trauma, secrets, violence, and shame. And when they returned, the courtroom went silent. The judge asked for the verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. Gasps filled the room. Tierra didn't flinch. The judge continued. On the charge of identity fraud and obstruction, guilty. On the charge of attempted witness tampering, guilty. But then came the sentencing recommendation. We recommend mental health rehabilitation in addition to incarceration, due to signs of prolonged psychological trauma and unresolved childhood abuse. Suggested sentence, 25 years with eligibility for parole after 15, contingent on treatment. It wasn't the harshest punishment, but it wasn't mercy either. It was a mirror. A reflection of the pain she caused, and the pain that caused her. After the trial, Kendrick left Atlanta for a while. He moved to Chicago, started over. But every so often he'd get a letter. No return address. Just his name. Inside always the same 5 words. "I still remember your calm." He never told anyone about them. Never replied. But he kept every single one in a box of his own. Not under the bed. Not hidden. Right on the bookshelf. Next to a photo of the woman who almost killed him. Because Kendrick understood something now. Some stories don't end clean. Some love doesn't die, it just mutates. And forgiveness? Sometimes that's the most violent act of all. Meanwhile, back at the prison, Tierra sat by the window in the therapy room. She no longer sketched fire or pain. Just trees. Water. Hands reaching toward light. When the therapist asked her, "If you could go back and do one thing differently, what would it be?" Tierra looked up and whispered, "I would have let him love me without fear." But the truth? She never really believed she deserved love. Because deep down, Tierra Jacobs had never left the box. And maybe, she never would. The years that followed Tierra's sentencing were quiet, on the surface. The media moved on. New cases. New faces. But for those who had stood inside that courtroom, the story of Tierra Jacobs never truly left them. Especially not Kendrick. By 2027, he had built a quiet life in Chicago. A modest apartment. A job in IT security. A new relationship with a woman named Imani, kind, grounded, nothing like Tierra. And yet, when Imani once asked him, "What happened to the scar on your chest?" Kendrick simply said, "A long story. With a sharp ending." But the past has a way of curling itself around the ankles of even the strongest people. Because one morning, Kendrick opened his mailbox and found a thin, unmarked envelope. No stamp. No return name. Inside was a single photo. Of Melanie. Or Janelle as she was now known. Standing in front of a daycare in Montgomery, Alabama. Holding a toddler. A little girl with Tierra's eyes. Kendrick dropped the photo. His heart froze. Could it be? Had Tierra? He flipped the photo over. Written in neat handwriting. Not everything was buried. Some seeds took root. He immediately called Detective Holloway, retired by now but still sharp. Kendrick asked one question. Did Tierra have a child? Holloway paused. Not that we ever knew. Medical records said she'd never carried a pregnancy full term. But Melanie, she had disappeared in 2019. That same year, Tierra moved to Atlanta. That same year, a baby was born in a Birmingham hospital under the name Jade Robinson. No father listed. No mother. Just a note in the file, abandoned at birth. Kendrick's mind raced. If Melanie had taken the child, was it hers? Or was Jade Tierra's daughter? Earlier on, Tierra said she paid someone to take Melanie away. But what if there was more? What if Tierra hadn't sent her sister away alone? What if she sent her away, pregnant? And not by accident, but by design. He booked a flight to Montgomery. Amani didn't understand. She asked, "Why dig up ghosts?" Kendrick just said, "Because one of them might still be alive." At the daycare, Kendrick waited in the parking lot until Melanie emerged. She recognized him instantly. Tense, guarded. But she didn't run. He walked up slowly, nodded toward the little girl tugging at her hand. "Is that?" Melanie sighed. "Her name's Jade. That's all I'll say." "Is she yours?" Long pause. "She's mine now." But Kendrick wasn't satisfied. Was she Tierra's? Melanie looked him in the eyes. "Do you want the truth, Kendrick? Or do you want peace?" He said nothing, and she walked away, leaving Kendrick in the heat, shaking, the sound of a toddler's laughter trailing behind her. Back in Chicago, the letters stopped. No more notes from prison. No more drawings. No more, "I still remember your calm." Tierra had vanished from his life completely. Until one day he got a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice. "Mr. Miles? This is Officer Green from the Georgia State Correctional Facility. I'm calling about inmate 04493, Tierra Jacobs." Kendrick braced himself. "What about her?" The officer hesitated. "She's been moved to medical isolation. Cancer. Stage 4. She's requested to see you." Silence. "She says she needs to tell you something before she goes." Kendrick didn't answer. Just hung up. For 2 nights he couldn't sleep. He stood by his window at 3 a.m., wondering what she could possibly say now. But curiosity is a cruel god. It doesn't let go. 3 days later, Kendrick walked into the sterile wing of the prison hospital. Tierra lay there, thin as a shadow, face pale, eyes still fierce. She smiled weakly when she saw him. "Didn't think you'd come." He said nothing. She motioned to the chair. He sat. For a long time they stared at each other. No guards in the room. Just the ticking of a clock. Finally, Tierra whispered, "I lied about one thing. Melanie didn't run. I begged her to take Jade. Because I couldn't raise her. Not after what I did. She's my daughter, Kendrick. And her father was Jamal." Kendrick's chest tightened. "So why didn't you tell anyone?" Tierra closed her eyes. "Because if they knew, they'd put her in the system. Just like I was. And I'd rather die than let that cycle repeat." She reached into a drawer and handed him a folded paper. It was a birth certificate. Jade Clemens. No father listed. Mother, Tiana Jennings. And under that, "In care of Melanie Jacobs." "Now you know," Tierra whispered. Asterisk, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to make sure she doesn't end up like me." Kendrick nodded. "I will." She smiled again. For the last time. And as he walked out, the nurse entered. Tierra's breathing had slowed. Her time was nearly up. And with her, the storm finally settled. But the seeds of her past? They were still growing. In a little girl named Jade. 3 months after Tierra's death, the sun rose over Montgomery like any other day. But for Kendrick, everything had changed. He had made a promise. And now he was standing outside the same daycare center where he had seen Jade for the first time. Her tiny hands had been gripping Melanie's fingers. Her laugh untouched by trauma. Untouched by the weight of the past. And Kendrick was here not as a savior, but as a witness. To make sure Tierra's story ended with something better than blood. Inside, he watched Jade finger paint alongside the other kids. Bright reds, yellows, blues, colors Tierra had long stopped seeing in her world. The teacher walked over with a smile. "You must be Kendrick," she said. "Jade talks about you. Says you were her mommy's special friend." He nodded quietly. "I just want to make sure she's okay." "She's more than okay," the teacher said. "She's got a big heart. Smart too. And Melanie? She's doing her best." But Kendrick still had questions. He wasn't here just to check in. He was here because of what Tierra told him with her dying breath. Because if Jade was the child of both Tierra and Jamal, that meant she carried the legacy of 2 lives lost to fire and fear. And somewhere in all of that, there had to be peace. Later that day, Kendrick met Melanie at her small apartment across town. Modest, clean. A single couch, a stack of books, and a framed photo of Jade on the wall. She poured 2 glasses of sweet tea. They sat in silence. "You know she's going to ask one day," Kendrick finally said. Melanie looked down. "I know. What are you going to tell her?" Melanie took a deep breath. "I'm going to tell her her mother loved her enough to let her go." Kendrick nodded slowly. And the rest? Melanie's voice cracked. When she's ready, I'll tell her everything. The pain, the fire, the fear. But I'll tell it like a story. One where monsters had names. And heroes didn't always wear capes. Because sometimes the people who love you the most are the ones who hurt the worst. That night, Kendrick stayed for dinner. Jade climbed onto his lap, chattering about cartoons and colors and her favorite teacher. And for a moment, it felt like hope. Like maybe the cycle had broken. Like maybe, just maybe, something beautiful had grown from the ashes. But the past is never done. Because just before Kendrick left, Melanie handed him a manila envelope. I found this, she said. After Tierra died. It was in her cell. Addressed to you. Kendrick opened it slowly. Inside was one final letter. Written in Tierra's slanted, familiar handwriting. Kendrick, I never got to say everything. I don't think I ever could. But if you're reading this, then I'm gone and somehow, you still care. I wasn't born evil. I was born broken. And every time I tried to fix myself, the world handed me sharper pieces. I hurt you because I didn't know how to be loved without fear. I stabbed you because I thought you were leaving, and everyone who ever left with pieces of me. You opened my box, Kendrick. But the truth is, I wanted you to. I wanted someone to know who I really was, before the past buried me for good. Jade is the only part of me that isn't angry. Protect her. Show her that love doesn't have to cut. That silence doesn't have to scream. That she can grow up without carrying the curse I couldn't outrun. I loved you. And I'm sorry I turned that love into a weapon. Kendrick folded the letter, eyes wet. He looked at Melanie. I'll keep my promise. She nodded. I know you will. And as Kendrick walked out into the Alabama night, something lifted off his shoulders. Not completely, but enough. Because not every story ends with justice. Not every monster is born. Some are made, some are shaped, and some never had a chance to choose another path. But Kendrick had. Melanie had. And now so would Jade. 2 years later. Jade was now 5. Bright, talkative, and obsessed with sunflowers. Every drawing she made had them, big yellow petals, thick green stems. Kendrick smiled every time she handed him one. It was her thing now. Sunflowers everywhere. Melanie had enrolled her in a private school with the help of a local scholarship fund. Kendrick helped with the paperwork. Every week he came by. Some days he picked her up. Other days he just sat with her on the floor while she played with her toy Dr. Kit, fixing invisible wounds. One afternoon, Jade sat in Kendrick's lap with a crayon in hand. Did you know my mommy used to sing to me? She asked out of nowhere. Kendrick looked at Melanie across the room. She froze. Who told you that? He asked gently. I heard it in a dream, Jade said, drawing a big circle of orange. She said she was sorry. Melanie looked away, blinking back tears. That night, after Jade fell asleep, Kendrick asked Melanie again. Has she ever asked where Tierra is? Melanie nodded. She thinks her mommy lives in the sky. I told her that's where people go when they're tired of hurting. Kendrick thought about the truth. About the fire, the scars, the box. About the letter Tierra left him. Do you think you'll ever tell her everything? Melanie looked out the window. When she's old enough to understand that broken love isn't the same as bad love. When she can hold the weight without letting it sink her. Kendrick said nothing. Because he knew that time would come. And when it did, Jade would be ready. Because unlike her mother, Jade was growing up with truth, not secrets. With care, not control. With peace, not pain. Still, Kendrick sometimes dreamed about Tierra. Not the violent end, but the quiet moments. Her laugh. The way she used to trace his tattoos with her fingertips like they were stories. In one dream, she was sitting in a field of sunflowers, barefoot, smiling. No blood. No screams. Just light. He didn't tell anyone about that dream. But he remembered it. And maybe that was enough. One Saturday, Kendrick took Jade to the park. They sat under a tree. Jade pointed at the clouds. That one looks like a box, she giggled. Kendrick smiled. Some boxes are meant to be opened, he said. She looked up at him. Did you open one? He hesitated, then nodded. Yes. And it changed everything. Jade hugged him. I'm glad you did. Otherwise I wouldn't have you. He pulled her close, heart swelling with a feeling that had no name. Because that was the final twist. The one no one expected. That out of 17 stab wounds, one girl was born who carried none of the violence. Only the light. Jade. Tierra's daughter. A new beginning. And Kendrick? He wasn't her father. But he was something else. Something just as sacred. He was her proof. That even the deepest wounds can grow sunflowers. And sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to live so loudly they can hear you in heaven. What lesson did you learn from this story, dear viewer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you have opened the box? And remember, some love is loud. Some love is quiet. But real love? It never cuts. Like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories that leave a mark. And until next time, stay curious,